Let's break it down straight from the hill to your hometown. No spin, no hype, just facts we find. AI's on the case, no truth left behind. Laws are written, deals are made. Who's got your back, who's throwing shade? We cut through the noise, decode the text, keeping it real. Congress in context, Congress in context, shining the light, breaking it down so you know what's right. Policies, votes, who's working for you? We bring the facts, the power is you.
Welcome to Congress in Context. We like to call these deep dives.
That's right, deep dives.
And today, the learner, you've given us a really interesting session of the House of Representatives to dig into.
A fascinating one.
Yeah, and I think our mission here is to really kind of like cut through the noise.
Absolutely.
Right? Not just list off like what bills were introduced and what votes happened, but really like try to help you understand what the major points of debate were.
What the trends are.
Yeah, the trends, and kind of like connect them to bigger things that are happening.
Exactly, the bigger picture.
In government and policy, so.
You know, when I was looking at this this particular session, what struck me is just how many different things they cover in a single day.
Right.
You know, you've got these really fundamental questions about how our democracy works with the election integrity debates.
Right.
Then you've got discussions about how to make government more efficient.
Yeah.
And then you have like all these really powerful moments of recognizing individuals and local communities.
It's really the full spectrum.
It is, yeah. It gives you a sense of like the human side of Congress too.
Totally. And I think a good place to start is with that big debate about election integrity, right?
Absolutely.
That was clearly a huge focus of this session.
Front and center.
Yeah, and specifically this AZI Act.
Right, the Safeguard American Voter Eligibility Act.
Which is, you know, a very loaded title, I think.
Very pointed.
Very pointed. It kind of tells you right away what the debate's going to be about, which is like who gets to vote, right?
Exactly.
And how do we ensure that elections are fair and secure?
Fundamental stuff.
Fundamental stuff. And so on the one hand, you have, you know, Republicans. We see a lot of quotes here from Mr. LaMalfa, Mr. Wilson, Mr. Harris.
Yes.
All arguing that this bill is absolutely critical to prevent non-citizens from voting.
Yeah.
In federal elections.
That's it. That's their main argument.
And they're very concerned about what they see as potential loopholes in existing laws.
Right.
Mr. LaMalfa, for example, brought up the issue of state IDs being given to undocumented immigrants.
Right. And
he sees that as a big problem.
A potential pathway to non-citizens voting.
Right. And this is where I think it's really important, the learner, to understand the principle behind this.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily about like a massive amount of voter fraud happening.
Right.
It's about this idea that like the vote itself is sacred.
It's about who gets to decide.
Exactly.
Who gets to decide the direction of our country.
And that it should only be citizens.
American citizens making those decisions.
Right. So that's the core of their argument.
Absolutely.
And Mr. Wilson even mentioned President Trump's executive order.
Right. Which aligns with the SAVE Act's goals.
Exactly. So it's clear that this is something that the executive branch is also very focused on.
Very much so.
And Mr. Harris, he brought up an interesting example. He talked about Arizona.
Right. Arizona has that state law requiring proof of citizenship.
To register to vote.
Right, to register to vote.
So it seems like they're kind of like looking at that as a model, potentially.
Yeah, like a potential model for federal law.
For federal law.
Yeah.
Now, it's important to note, though, that the Republicans who were speaking, they were very careful to address concerns about the bill.
Oh, absolutely.
Like they anticipated that people might say, oh, this is going to make it harder for certain people to vote.
Right.
And Mr. LaMalfa specifically pointed out that the bill has provisions to accommose voters with disabilities.
Yeah. Recognizing that there could be unique challenges there.
Exactly.
And they also wanted to make sure it didn't disenfranchise people whose names had changed after marriage or divorce.
Right.
Like, if you haven't updated all your documents yet,
right,
you can still vote while you get that sorted out.
Right. So they're really framing it as a common sense measure.
Yeah, they're trying to address those potential concerns head on.
To enhance security, but like not actually suppress anyone's vote.
Right. Make it secure but fair for everyone.
So that's one side of the story.
Now let's hear what the Democrats have to say.
Right, because the Democrats had a very different take.
Yeah.
We see quotes from Mrs. Trahan, Mrs. Johnson of Texas, and Mr. Veazey.
Strong voices on the other side of the aisle.
And their main argument is that this is a solution in search of a problem.
Right.
Right. They point out that it's already illegal for non-citizens to vote in federal elections.
Explicitly illegal.
It's like the law is already there.
Yeah, they're saying it's not a loophole.
Right.
It's already addressed.
And Mrs. Trahan was very pointed. She said, like, show me the evidence.
Where is the widespread problem? That needs this kind of legislation.
Right. If this is such a big problem.
Give me the data.
Give me the data.
And that data wasn't presented in the record we saw.
Right.
So it really raises the question, the learner, if it's already illegal.
What's this really about?
What's the motivation here?
And the Democrats, they're very clear. They're saying this is voter suppression.
Plain and simple.
Plain and simple. This is an attempt to make it harder.
For certain groups to vote.
For certain groups to vote, right.
Yeah.
Groups that tend to, lean Democrat.
Yeah.
And Mrs. Trahan's example about women who change their name after marriage.
That's a powerful one.
It's a really good one. It's like, okay, so now you're telling me I have to have, like, an updated passport.
An updated birth certificate.
Which, like, how many people, keep those things updated?
Exactly.
A huge barrier.
It could be a huge barrier for a lot of people.
Especially, if you're not someone who travels internationally.
Right. If you don't need a passport regularly.
Right.
You might not have one just sitting around.
Right. Right. And they also talked about military personnel stationed overseas.
Yeah, how are they supposed to meet these requirements?
Yeah, are they going to, fly back to the U.S. just to update their documents?
Exactly.
And rural voters.
Right, people in rural areas who might have limited access.
To government offices.
Yeah, where it might be a long trip just to get to the DMV.
Right, so they're pointing out all these practical problems.
And potential consequences.
That could result from this law.
Yeah, unintended consequences.
And Mr. Veazey, he just came right out and said, this is about disenfranchisement.
This is about preventing people from voting.
Yeah, so you can see the learner, it's a really fundamental disagreement.
It's about two very different visions of how elections should work.
Right.
And who we're trying to protect.
Yeah, are we trying to protect against
the potential of fraud?
The very rare instance of fraud.
Even if it's rare.
Or are we trying to protect people's right to vote?
And make sure everyone has access.
And we saw a little bit of this tension play out even in the procedural vote.
Oh, yeah.
Related to the SAVE Act, there was this whole side debate.
Little mini debate.
About proxy voting.
For new parents.
Yeah, which I thought was really fascinating.
Yeah.
So this is Luna, a Republican.
From Florida.
She was trying to get this amendment passed.
To allow new parents to vote by proxy.
Yeah, so basically, if you've just had a baby.
You can designate someone.
To vote for you.
To cast your vote.
But the Republican leadership was like not having it.
They were opposed to it.
And I think that's really interesting, right?
Yeah, it shows that there's not always
total agreement within a party.
Even on something that seems like it would be, straightforward.
Yeah, and you might think like, oh, Republicans, they're all about, family values.
Right.
So of course they would support this.
Making it easier for parents.
But it's more complicated than that.
Yeah, there's always more to the story.
So yeah, I mean, I think the SAVE Act is definitely something to keep an eye on.
Absolutely.
It's going to be a big one.
A big one to watch.
So let's move on to something completely different.
Yeah.
Let's talk about Doge.
Doge.
So the learner, before we even get into the specifics, it's really important to understand that Doge is not like a formal government department.
It's not like the Department of Defense.
Right, or the Department of Education.
Right.
Doge, which stands for Department of Government Efficiency. That's kind of a nickname.
Yeah, it's not officially established by Congress.
Right. It was created by presidential executive order.
Which means it has the force of law.
Within the executive branch.
But it doesn't have the same kind of permanence as a law passed by Congress.
Right. And it's more of an advisory body.
Yeah, it's like a group of people.
With staff and different agencies.
Trying to make things run better.
More efficiently.
Right.
And they're specifically focused on IT upgrades.
A lot of their work is about technology.
Modernizing systems.
And they have a deadline, actually.
Yeah, they're supposed to wrap up by July 2026.
So they're on a tight timeline.
Now, what makes Doge really interesting is the involvement of Elon Musk.
Oh, yeah, that's a big one.
Right.
He's listed as an unpaid special government employee.
Which is kind of a weird title.
It is a bit of a mouthful.
But basically, he's working with them.
On this initiative.
Mm-hmm. And his goals are, well, they're pretty ambitious.
They are.
He talks about saving taxpayer money.
Reducing the national debt.
Ending the, quote, Tyranny of the bureaucracy.
Streamlining government, making it more efficient.
Right.
Cutting out waste.
And initially, like, the numbers they were throwing around were huge.
There was talk of saving $2 trillion a year.
Which is, like, an insane amount of money.
It's a lot of money.
It's hard to even fathom.
But, that number has been kind of walked back a bit since then.
Right. It's probably not realistic.
Probably not.
But even so, like, the things that they're doing, they're pretty significant.
Yeah, they're making moves.
They're really going after, like, spending in all these different departments.
They're scrutinizing everything.
Yeah, they're claiming to be uncovering fraud and abuse.
Although we didn't see specific examples of that in this record.
Right, we don't know exactly what they're talking about.
It's a bit vague.
They're cutting DEI contracts.
Which is, diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives.
Right.
A lot of debate about that.
They're targeting agencies like USAI.
Which is the U.S. Agency for International Development.
Right, which, does a lot of work overseas.
Development assistance, humanitarian aid.
They're offering buyouts to government employees.
Trying to shrink the size of the federal workforce.
They're even trying to influence the CFPB.
The Consumer Financial Protection Bureau.
Right, so they're really not shy about, like, going after different parts of the government.
They're shaking things up.
Yeah.
And that's leading to some pretty serious questions.
Oh, yeah, a lot of concerns.
A lot of concerns.
And I think the biggest one is, like, what are the motivations here?
Right.
Is this really just about efficiency?
Or is there an ideological agenda at play?
Right, because if you look at the agencies that they're targeting.
Some people are saying it looks like they're going after.
The ones they disagree with politically.
The ones that don't align with their worldview.
Right.
And Miss Johnson of Texas, she had some really pointed remarks about this.
Yeah, she's worried about cuts to the NIH.
The National Institutes of Health.
Which, does a lot of important medical research.
There's a lot of scientific research.
And she's basically saying, look, this is an attack on science.
This is about ideology, not efficiency.
And it's not just about targeting specific agencies.
There's also concern about the impact on essential services.
Right.
Like, what happens if these efficiency drives go too far?
Yeah, are people going to lose access to the services they need?
Right.
Now, the article we were looking at mentioned that Social Security and Medicare.
Which are huge programs.
Huge parts of the budget.
They're mostly mandatory spending.
Right, so they're probably safe.
They're probably not going to be touched.
But still, there's a lot of worry about the potential consequences.
Yeah.
And the article also pointed out that there could be legal challenges.
To what DOGE is doing.
Yeah, and conflicts of interest.
Especially given Elon Musk's involvement.
Right, because he's not like a traditional government employee.
He's coming from the private sector.
Right, so there are questions about, like, is he using this to benefit his own companies?
Or his own interests.
Yeah, and we also saw Ms. Klebe raising concerns about data use and AI.
With Elon Musk involved, that's definitely something to consider.
Right, because he's very involved in those areas.
Yeah.
So, it's an interesting idea.
It is.
Making government more efficient.
Most people would agree with that goal.
But the way they're going about it.
It's raising a lot of red flags.
A lot of red flags. So,
yeah.
DOGE is something else to keep an eye on.
Yeah, we'll see how it plays out.
But now, let's shift gears a little bit.
Okay.
The Learner, we've talked about these big policy debates, but the Congressional Record also gives us a glimpse into some of the other things
that Congress deals with
on a daily basis.
The more human side of things.
Exactly.
The everyday work.
So, for example, Ms. Clark, she took a moment to recognize two departing staffers.
Wendy Hamilton and Michael Reed.
And, staffers, they're the people who, like, keep Congress running.
They do a lot of the behind-the-scenes work.
They're the unsung heroes.
Yeah.
And so it's nice to see them get some recognition.
Absolutely.
Ms. De La Cruz, she brought up a really specific issue affecting her district.
She announced economic relief for farmers in Texas.
Yeah, they're facing water shortages and drought.
It's been really tough for them.
Yeah, and she mentioned that the last sugar mill in Texas had to close.
Which could have a ripple effect.
On the whole citrus industry.
Yeah, because they use a lot of the same resources.
Right.
And it could impact national supply chains.
Yeah, so it's interesting how, like, a local issue
can have these broader implications.
Right. And Ms. Johnson of Texas, she was back at it again.
This time she was talking about potential cuts to the NIH.
Yeah, she's very passionate about that.
She is.
And she made a really important point. She said, look, this isn't a partisan issue.
Disease doesn't care if you're a Democrat or a Republican.
Right. So she's calling for, like, a bipartisan approach.
She's protecting public health.
And then we had some really nice moments of celebration.
Oh, yeah?
Mr. Womack congratulated Peyton Bowling.
Who is Miss America's teen.
Yeah, and he highlighted her commitment to civic engagement.
Which is great to see.
And then there were these amazing tributes to centenarians.
People turning 100 years old.
Yeah, Charlie Woolman.
World War II veteran.
And Leonard Massinio.
Who was born the same year The Great Gatsby was published.
And Mount Rushmore was authorized.
It's amazing to think about all the history they've lived through.
It really is.
Mr. Thompson, he reminded everyone about National Volunteer Month.
Yeah, April is National Volunteer Month.
And he talked about the importance of giving back to your community.
And Mr. Correa shared some really inspiring stories.
About DACA recipients.
Yeah, highlighting their contributions to society.
One was a nurse and an author.
Yeah, and the other one was a public health professional.
Really impressive people.
But we also saw some more serious concerns being raised.
Yeah, it wasn't all positive.
Mr. Menendez was questioning immigration enforcement policies.
He was concerned about a constituent who is facing deportation.
Even though they had legal protections.
Yeah, it raised questions about whether the administration is really only targeting
violent criminals.
as they claim.
Right, because this person didn't seem to fit that description.
And then there was a really important theme that emerged.
Yeah.
Which was this concern about attacks on the judiciary.
Yeah, Mr. Menendez, Mr. Espaillat, Ms. Jackson Lee.
They were all worried about the same thing.
Yeah, they're basically saying that the executive branch
And some members of Congress.
are trying to undermine the independence of the judiciary.
By criticizing judges.
Who rule against them.
And even trying to impeach them.
And Mr. Menendez, he even quoted the American Bar Association.
Which has come out strongly against the intimidation of judges.
Right, because that's a really fundamental principle of our democracy.
The separation of powers.
Right, the three branches of government are supposed to be independent.
They're supposed to provide checks and balances on each other.
And so when you have, one branch trying to pressure another branch,
that's a big problem.
That's a big problem.
And we also saw some of the more routine aspects of congressional business.
Yeah, like electing members to committees.
Right.
And then just a ton of, brief tributes.
To people in their districts.
Yeah, for all sorts of things.
Like Mary Gislison, who was a dispatcher for 43 years.
Yeah, and Dave Preisler, who's a big name in the pork industry.
And Raul Grijalva, who recently passed away.
And then there were celebrations of the USS Iowa being commissioned.
And the Green Central High School band.
And Neville Smith, who's retiring as a lawyer.
And Kiki Camarena, who was a DEA agent who was killed in the line of duty.
It's really the full spectrum of human experience.
It is.
It's all represented there.
So the learner, as you can see, even just one day
in the Congressional Record
can give you a really rich picture of what's happening.
In our government.
The debates.
The policy initiatives.
The people.
It's all there.
And what's so fascinating is how these seemingly separate discussions
are actually all interconnected.
They all feed into each other.
So the debate about who gets to vote.
The question of how to make government more efficient.
The recognition of individuals and their contributions.
It all ties back to these bigger questions about
what kind of country we want to be.
What we value.
What our priorities are.
And it shows that government isn't just about passing laws.
It's about this constant process of negotiation.
And representation.
And compromise.
And it raises a really important question for you, the learner.
How do these debates
and these initiatives,
even the ones that seem really small or procedural,
how do they ultimately affect your life?
How do they affect your community?
Because understanding that connection
is what makes you an informed citizen.
And an engaged citizen.
And so to stay informed,
we encourage you to check out some of the resources we've listed.
Summaries of congressional activity.
The websites of your elected officials.
Nonpartisan analyses of legislation.
There's a lot of information out there.
And we hope this deep dive has given you a good starting point.
Yeah, and maybe even spark some curiosity to learn more.
Thanks for joining us.
On Congress in Context.